Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Cool Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheists United Studios. Hey Joey, the theme song to the long-running PBS animated series Arthur, performed by Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers, begins, "Every day when you're walking down the street, and everybody that you meet has an original point of view." Questions about what constitutes originality aside, there's nothing new under the sun and all that, this song touches on something deep. The way we see the world is shaped by our unique experiences. This is a big reason why we like stories. It's the closest we'll ever get to truly knowing about someone else, where they came from, what they've been through, where they're going, how they think, how they feel, and how they develop and express their points of view. Our guest today is passionate about learning from and sharing these kinds of stories.
We're delighted to talk with Maggie Rawling Smith, a writer, filmmaker, and activist who directed the documentary Tucson Salvage, co-written with her husband Brian Jabez Smith, co-adapted Brian's collection of short stories into the Amazon Prime series Spent Saints, and directed the documentary Whole Enchilada about the roots of Tucson's desert rock music. She is also the author of a forthcoming young adult novel, Catamopus, and edits the literary magazine Glue Gun. Maggie, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
So, as I mentioned, Tucson Salvage, Whole Enchilada, and much of your work centers on Tucson, Arizona, where you live. What makes Tucson such a right place for storytelling?
Well, Tucson was built on the spirit and literal bones of the Tohono O'odham tribe. And it's a very haunted place by many people over many years' accounts. It's also super close to La Frontera and Nogales and all of the border crossing casualties that we have every year. So there's a really great synergy between Native culture and Hispanic, specifically Mexican culture here. And it's also a really great town because U of A is such a good college, public-wise. So we have some curious and interested people between the professors and their families and the students, which makes it neat. And then it's also along the I-10, the major stop between Los Angeles and El Paso. So we have a lot of truckers and trains and, transient people that come through here. So it makes it a pretty great place for storytelling.
Yeah, so I'm a big advocate for local stories, local history, and I remind people that everyone is, in fact, a historical figure. History is a process, and it's always unfolding, and human history is a collective story of all of us, our kind of impossibly intricate story of all types of people, not just the rich and famous and powerful and so forth. I'm wondering if you share that point of view. That's something that I pick up on when I'm looking at your documentaries in particular.
Absolutely. I think that we've kind of settled as a society for the bell curve. It's like as long as everyone has like a mediocre, like C+ life, it's fine. And a few people rise to the top and a few people fail. And I guess I'm very not interested in the top 1-2% that is well covered by regular media. I'm much more interested in either the people who are stuck in the middle and realize it and are trying to do something about it, or the people that have just completely fallen through the cracks.
So your documentary, Whole Enchilada, explores Tucson's rock scene. What about that scene makes it so special, and what attracted you to it and maybe to the subject of music in general?
Well, Tucson is a strange place because we're so isolated with desert all around us, but we do have that awesome mariachi influence coming up from Mexico and norteño influence. And then we also have like hip hop because of the reservation nearby, and heavy metal because of the reservation nearby. And then we have this kind of like college rock, jangle rock scene too. It's a great confluence of stuff. And of course, there's the legend of the cowboy, and we're only 50 minutes from the OK Corral. So you definitely have the gun-toting libertarians here represented as well. So it makes for great storytelling, but it also makes for great music and great self-expression. And the way that it's been able to stay niche all this time and not blow up like Seattle or, even somewhere like Tempe, who had the Gym Blossoms years ago, experienced that kind of temporary spotlight that kind of amalgamized everything. We've always kind of stayed out of the fray, except for maybe Linda Ronstadt. So we're doing pretty okay for originality here.
I don't know if you want to share about this. I know that you mentioned before to me that you have a little bit of rock and roll history in your family, I believe, with Susie cream cheese.
Ah, yes, that's true. My mom's stepsister is actually purported to be the actual Susie cream cheese of Frank Zappa fame, and did in fact run off from rural North Carolina, where she was from, and disappear into the hills and canyons of LA for several years. She confirmedly is, on a few liner notes as credited with tambourine and some other things. So it was very exciting when I saw Zappa Play Zappa. I wore my Susie Cream t-shirt and had Dweezil sign it. So it felt like we were coming back to the roots.
Very cool. So I think when we think about popular culture, we generally think of big entertainment projects, mainstream appeal, monetary success, that kind of thing. But in the broader sense, pop culture is really the people's culture. I would even call it our contemporary shared collective folk culture, film, television, radio, books, comic books, magazines, and all of that, whether or not they attract a large audience. So, if we have big budget blockbuster spectacles on one side of this pop culture spectrum, your films are perhaps on the other side of that spectrum. Both types of movies, of course, tell stories, but in a profound way, the stories you tell in Tucson Salvage, in particular, are more real, both because they are unvarnished nonfiction and because the people you profile are, at least on the surface, ordinary. But as anyone who has ever lived lives knows, there are many complicated and sometimes tragic layers that make up what we call ordinary. So my question for you is, how and why did you decide to give voice to these people in Tucson Salvage and some of your other projects?
So my husband, Brian Smith, does a column called Tucson Salvage in the Tucson Weekly. And there's a story that appears every 2 weeks. And he's specifically trying to give voice to the underserved. And he gave me access to 8.5 years worth of columns and said, you can pick the people you want for the documentary. So the way that I kind of analyzed that was sort of people that I thought no one had ever seen on screen before, or people who were so rarely put on screen that they were often stereotyped or undermined when they were put on screen. And I tried specifically to take out as much movie magic as possible. Like, I didn't use any music during to underscore or change any of the emotion. I just let them tell the story in their own words and tried to really edit it with the flow of their own personal monologue. And I spent a lot of time with the people in the places where they either lived or camped, or just tried to get a really authentic feel for who they were and then bring them to the big screen. And some of the people are very specifically kind of like scary to the mainstream. And I feel like most people wouldn't stop and even like give them $1 through their window. So I think it's important that they have the chance as viewers behind the safety of their screen to actually hear these people out and see what's going on in their lives.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you humanized these stories, and the bare bones approach is really effective. I prefer it. I think the stripping away all of that glitz and glamour and just showing people how they are, it's really powerful.
The coolest thing about doing that was the Loft is like the art house theater in Tucson, and when it debuted, we had a screening there, and we invited all the participants, and they all brought their entourage or their families or whoever they wanted to bring, and they sat in the first 10 rows. And just watching their faces when they saw themselves on the big screen was super powerful, because not only did they think they didn't have stories worth telling in almost every single case, but when their friends saw them, it was like they totally validated their lives. And some of the people who really had, most people in the film had really tough lives, but, some of the kids of the people, for example, were really for the first time, perhaps in respect or in awe of their mom or dad for all they had been through instead of just feeling marginalized or like, oh, we're just crappy poor people no one cares about in this town. So it was super, super moving.
For us Arizona outsiders, might you explain a little bit about the substantive differences between Phoenix and Tucson, for instance?
Sure. Well, Phoenix is the big metropolitan area that strives to be as popular as Denver or Miami, right? So you get all the plastic surgery and the Kardashian aspirations over there. You see a lot more suicide doors and amazing cars, and it coincides with there being very low taxes and very poor education publicly. And also, sadly, a huge discrepancy of wealth, which leads to a lot of gang violence and racial tension in Phoenix proper, because there's essentially the white part of Phoenix, and then South Phoenix is Black, and then everywhere in between is Mexican, and ne'er the three shall meet except perhaps on the west side at a head shop. So it's an interesting place, but it's pretty problematic when you're a kid. Most people I knew grew up there and left as soon as they could at age 18, or, at least moved to a suburb for college. And then people come back when they have their corporate job, or their Merrill Lynch job. And then they retire there because there's lots of golf courses and lots of green grass despite the desert. Tucson is a little, blue dot in the midst of a reddish purple or perhaps just red state. And because we're close to the border and have a lot of well-educated people and a smaller population, I think we tend to, you'll tend to see a lot more empathy, a lot of signs of, giving people water is not a crime, that kind of thing. Lots of bumper sticker cars, keep Tucson weird. There's a real civic pride about being nicer and being better here. And Phoenix could care less about Tucson and just is pretty snobby towards us. So they pretty much just leave us alone, which is probably pretty good.
Yeah, one of the things that I think you're drawing out is the local nature of our lives. And maybe there are these kind of amazing stories that we would never think of right outside our door, wherever we might be living. I think there's something inspirational about your approach to focusing on the local, because ultimately that's where we all live and there are stories all around us.
That's right. I do like to focus on the local, because when when you live in LA, most things have been over media saturated. And so you can't ever cover anything that hasn't already been covered by a much bigger lens and broader perspective. But here you can really focus on the guy on the corner holding up the sign that's been holding it up for 4 years, and what is his story and why is he still there, and what's his dog's name. And it's a nice specificity that I think becomes sort of universal pretty quickly, because everyone has that guy in their town. And everyone is reminded, like, people aren't transparent. You can't just look through the lawn worker because you just want to see the pretty grass. You need to stop and say hello to them and really get to know them. I hope that the film does that. That's the idea of the work. It's just that it inspires people to give other people a chance.
Okay, so I understand you're working on sort of a follow-up to the Whole Enchilada?
I am. It is the last night, and it's about the band Gentlemen After Dark, which is featured in the Whole Enchilada, who was originally produced by Alice Cooper and Dick Wagner and was really going places, and they were on People magazine's like next best thing list, like really alongside Princess Diana. And then Interscope Records chose to go with hip hop, and they dropped all their rock and roll, and their stuff just fell through the cracks. It sat in bins for 20 years. And then Forever Records purchased their recordings, seeing that they were really quality 80s new wave band that not many people knew outside of Arizona. And so their job is to place songs in television programming. And Gentlemen After Dark have actually done really well and had 3 songs placed so far. And one of them was featured in its entirety in Stranger Things. And as a result of the cult following of that show, they have now over 1 million hits on Spotify and have playlist presence in all like they can see the list, like 72 countries or something like that. So this documentary will splice together current interview and concert footage with old footage from the 80s and late 80s, and sort of present a band that should have been, but no one quite knew about. So
maybe you'll help to give them a new audience.
I think so. I think they might be at the point of retirement, though, because they didn't really want to be the old guy band and rock and roll. You know, they were young and excited and very beautiful, and their whole look was something else. So it's hard for them. They're a band struggling with their own mortality.
Could you tell us a little bit about your literary magazine, Glue Gun, and its publisher, R&R Press?
Sure. So R&R Press is named after two of my kids, Reese and Ricky Rose. And it was established because, much like creating your own record label when you're an independent, after my husband had gone through working with two small publishers and felt like they were not up to the standards, and basically we had to make up the difference, whether it was with our own PR or our own touring or whatever for the books, we decided to create our own press, both to put out our work and also to put out work that maybe other people that were more money conscious or success conscious would never put out. And so we just put out work that we love, and we do a literary magazine twice a year, and it's a labor of love. We just basically seek to regain our money and not go into the red. That's our only goal with it. So we can really choose content that's meaningful to us, and it spans, photography and art and line drawing, and then beyond that, any genre of writing. So we've really enjoyed doing it, and it's given voice to a lot of people that, haven't been published before, and kind of got them further so they can either apply for grants or apply for bigger magazines. So it makes us feel like it's kind of a good way of giving back to the community too.
Speaking of writing, you're working on your first novel, Catamopus. What's it about?
So Catamopus is the first day of 5th grade for Delilah M. Pennymaker, and she is a latchkey kid about to go to middle school and have to get there by herself on her bike and deal with all of the grown-up things of her mom being at work, and her dad's a truck driver, so he's gone a lot. And on that day, 4 talking mice appear to her, Catamopus and his friends Muggloo and Roundface, who happen to be the same characters that her dad always tells her bedtime stories about and that he grew up with. The book kind of goes back and forth in the two perspectives of, mirroring her life of wanting attachment to her dad, which she never has because he's always gone, and clinging to being a kid and imagine the world of imagination and adventure, and then being at school and kind of dealing with social pressure and bullying and things that you do in middle school. And it's sort of the dichotomy of her life. And I hope there's 2 more. I have a trilogy in me, so hopefully it works out.
Sounds great. And sounds like you have a very specific message and audience in mind for the work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to cheat in a lot of social consciousness. One of the main characters is a social justice activist mouse, and he is going for the anti-speciesist camp of being kind to roof rats. And roof rats in Phoenix are totally expendable, and they're very in a similar position to immigrant families, unfortunately, undocumented workers and things like that, the way that people talk about them and find them to be totally either transparent, or if they get in their way, they just want to get rid of them and trap them. And so it's very deliberate. I sneak that in there about being kind to all animals and valuing them, which also sort of serves my vegan agenda, which I always secretly have as well. So
I also have that secret or not so secret agenda myself. So I appreciate that.
And as far as personal ties to the work, my grandfather was a failed cartoonist, and he actually came up with a cat whose name was Catamopus. And so I turned it into a mouse who lost his leg and his eye fighting a cat. And so I bring my grandfather's sort of desire to have a character into the mix. And then my dad used to tell me stories about catamopus. And so then my dad died when I was pretty young. So it sort of represents my family a little bit too, which is really nice.
Yeah, you wear many hats. You're a mom, you work, you have your creative pursuits, you're an activist, and you're studying towards a master's in Jewish studies. Any tips on how to keep somebody's plate spinning?
Just to do proper self-care. I mean, that's honestly the ground of everything. You have to be in balance to be able to spin anything, right? So just trying to make sure I always get my exercise, always get sleep, always eat pretty well, decently at least, and try not to drive myself too crazy, make my brain shut down at night, which is the big challenge.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Maggie. And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.